Hi all, it's PJ and welcome to the video supplement for applique frames, die cut method without a die cutter. Not all of you have a die cutter, and even if you have a die cutter, I made up these shapes so there aren't actually dies that go with them. So one of the big advantages of using die cut shapes is that it allows the embroidery border to cover all of the fabric. When you do a trim in the hoop applique, usually the border is only covering half of the fabric. So in this particular instance, there's a 4mm border, and I'll bring this up so that you can see a little bit closer. So there's a 4mm border, and the fabric actually goes all the way out to the edge here. If this was trim in the hoop, your fabric would actually be sitting about halfway in between, meaning that you'd really only be catching about 2mm of your fabric, which would not make for a very secure applique. So the other thing that's really nice about this process, especially if you're going to do it with towels, which is what I'm showing here, is that your applique or your embroidery is actually done only on the applique part, and it doesn't go all the way through to the back of the towel. So let me open this out. So here you can see the back side of the towel, and the only thing that's here is the embroidery from the frame. So a lot more of your towel is usable. You won't have any scratchy embroidery on it. Okay, so these particular designs can be used in multiple ways. So this way I'm just showing it on a towel. You can also skip the satin border and just use what I'm calling the Deco Border. And once again, you can see that the stitching starts at the edge of the fabric and goes all the way in. And then this just shows the different designs. So there's 3 different designs for Club this month, and they're all right there. The other thing that you can do with these designs is you can do what's called freestanding applique. So in this instance, I'll bring that up a little bit closer. I made just a little wall hanging, and it's got a lining in the back, so you're not seeing the back side of the embroidery. On this one, I put a little ribbon hanger on it. You could also use these designs to create like a little pillow or a little sachet. On the back side of this, I used 2 different pieces, so you could slide a little sachet in there. And this one doesn't have any stabilizer in it. And at the end of the video, I'll go through these 2, what I'm calling options. This one has the stabilizer in it, so it's nice and sturdy. Okay, we'll get started with the process. Setting up the design, you'll go to your machine. The first thing that you'll want to do is bring up your crosshair, and then you'll add your frame design. And then you'll add your initials or monogram. So depending on the font that you choose, it may come in not quite centered. So to adjust that, just go into your edit screen and then move that over so that it is visually centered. Like that. So there's your design. So you should have 5 colors in your design. You'll have the crosshair, and then there's 4 colors in the frame design. Actually, sorry, there's 3 colors in the frame design, and then your initials. Because there's 2 letters here, there's black showing up here twice. This is part 1, making the die cut part. This is step 2. So I've got a piece of tearaway stabilizer, and I've lightly sprayed it with temporary spray adhesive. Got my hoop, and then I've also got my applique fabric, and I've already fused Applique Wonder to the back of my fabric. So I'm gonna hoop my sprayed stabilizer. I like to spray my stabilizer first and then hoop it. You get less, you don't get any spray on your hoop because you're not spraying the hoop with the stabilizer. You're then going to take your applique fabric and you're going to center it in your hoop and just press that down to secure it to the hoop. At the machine, you're going to skip color number 1 of your design and you'll stitch color number 2, which is the die line, and that's the line that you'll be cutting on. So I would recommend using a thread that you'll be able to easily see on your background fabric. I'm going to go stitch that and I'll be back. This is color number 2 stitched on your applique fabric. We're now going to skip colors 3 and 4, and you're going to go down to number 5, which is your initials or your monogram. I'm going to go do that. I'll be back. This is your initials stitched out on your die cut part. So this will now be step 3, cutting out the die cut part. So you're just going to unhoop all of this. And then I like to just rough cut this out to get all the excess out of the way. It will make the fine cutting just a little bit easier. So then you're going to cut right on that stitching line. I like to cut all the straight bits first and then go back and do the curves. So you're just going to cut that whole thing out. And you will have your die cut part without a die cutter. And I'm just going really slow and cutting right on that line. And there's your die cut part. So you can just peel away all those little bits, and there you go. So we're on to part 2, and this is step number 4. So you're gonna set up the hoop, and for this is where you're gonna be applying your applique piece to whatever you're gonna be working on. In this case, I'm using a towel. So I have my hoop set up with my Perfect Stick Tearaway, and it's been hooped with the paper side up. So I'm going to take a pin or a needle, something that's sharp, and I'm just going to gently score the paper. You need to press hard enough to score through the paper, but not so hard that you're going to score through the stabilizer. And then I just use the point of my, I just have a big needle, to pick up the edge and then just tear that away. And then this part is the tacky part of the stabilizer, which this works great for doing towels because towels are really difficult to hoop. All right, so that's step number 4. We're going to go back to the embroidery machine, and your design should have already gone back to number 1 because when you stitch number 5, it will have started the design over again. So this time you're going to stitch color number 1 just on the stabilizer. That's going to be your crosshair, and that's what you're going to use to position your towel or your project. So I'm going to go stitch that now. I'll be right back. The next 2 steps are optional, so this is 4A. You can extend your crosshair lines, and that will just give you a bit more line when you go to line up your towel. So I just use a friction pen and a ruler, and I'm just going to place this, in essence, over the top of that crosshair, and I'm just going to extend these lines up and over. So that just shows that I've extended those lines. Then for B is I've just taken a piece of the paper that I tore off from here, and I just cut a little circle, and I'm going to place this in the center of the crosshair. The one thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that this circle is not larger than your applique piece. And I'm going to put this with the shiny side face down against the tacky. And that's just going to actually prevent your towel from sticking at the very center. It'll make it easier when you go to peel this off. So I've got my towel. Let me move that out of the way. So I'm going to fold this with the right sides together. And basically, you're just going to position the towel at your crosshair, and then you can determine how far up or down you want this. If this is way in the middle of something, you could simply fold this up again and then just use this top left quadrant to place your towel. Then just bring this down, making sure that it's aligned to that crosshair, and then fold this over. And then just press on that to secure it to the tacky stabilizer. Step 6, applying the applique. So you're going to go to your embroidery machine and you're going to stitch color number 2, which for this step, it's the placement line, but it's also the die line. I'm going to go stitch that, and I'll be back. I've stitched color number 2 on my towel, so there's my placement line. I'm going to take my applique piece, and on the back side you're going to tear away the tearaway stabilizer. And then you're going to take off the protective paper from the applique wonder. So I find the easiest way to do this is find a corner and I bend it so that the paper is on the top. And if you kind of make a hard crease, usually what will happen is the paper will stay bent, and then you can peel away that paper. So now you've got your applique wonder, which is tacky, which is what's going to help to hold this in place. And then you're just going to place this using your placement line and stick that down. So we'll take this back to the machine and we're going to stitch color number 3, which is a satin border, and then color number 4, which is what I'm calling the Deco Border. And then you'll skip number 5. You've already stitched that. That was your initials. So this is after number 3 and number 4 have been stitched, and your project is done. So now it's just time to unhoop and remove the stabilizer. So I'm just going to unhoop this. And you'll just want to tear away your stabilizer from the outside. Here's a little tip. So this piece of stabilizer up here at the top that still has the paper on it, you can just trim away the part that you used and then save this. This makes great patches. If you accidentally get a hole in your embroidery or you have to remove some stitches and you need additional stabilizer, you can just peel the protective paper off of this and slap it up on the back side of your hoop. Away you go. No need to waste that. Okay. So now you've got the inside bit of this. So I just kind of get in here at the edge and pull this up. And when you can get to where that your little piece of paper is, it helps because you can basically just get your finger underneath there and then peel this away. So, and if you were wondering why I did my crosshair smaller than the design, this is the reason. When you go to tear this away, your crosshair isn't up into your border stitches. So when you take this out, it makes it real easy. You don't have to cut any of those stitches. So you're just gonna remove that, trim up your little tails, and your project is done. And this is what you've got. This is the back side, and as you can see, there's very little embroidery actually on the back. So if you had done that all the way through, all of this embroidery stitching would be on the back side as well. It just makes for a really nice, clean back side of your towel. These are the options. So this is 7A, and so this is 7A1, the freestanding applique with lining. And by freestanding applique, basically that just means it's not attached to anything else. It's freestanding. So at your embroidery machine, you'll set up your design similar to the way it was done in the first part of the project, or in the first project. But you'll skip the crosshair design because you're not actually adding this to anything. The crosshair was there so that you could position what you were applying your applique to. This is freestanding, so no need for the crosshair. So you'll just open up your frame design and then you'll add your initials or your monogram. So then you will hoop up. This is just Floriani medium weight tearaway, and I sprayed it pretty liberally with temporary spray adhesive. You're then gonna take your applique fabric, and in this instance, because it's not going on anything, this is just the fabric. There's no applique wonder. So you're gonna then position this as before, centered in your hoop, and then press that down really well. The temporary spray adhesive for this particular method, the temporary spray adhesive is the only thing that's going to be holding that fabric into your hoop, which is why you want to spray that stabilizer pretty liberally. All right, so I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to stitch out my initials. So in this case, it's going to be color number 4. So you've sewn your initials on your fabric, and as you can see here, there's a little bit of puckering. That's because there was really nothing other than the temporary spray adhesive holding that fabric in place. So you are gonna just gently release this from the edges, and then I know this is gonna sound kind of weird, but then you're gonna gently put that back down. You don't wanna stretch your fabric at all because you want your die, the next step is you're going to stitch your die line so that you'll know where to cut, and you want that to actually be in the correct size. So when you put your fabric back down, just very gently replace it, but you don't want to stretch your fabric at all. Okay, like that. So then you're going to take and you're going to place whatever you're going to use for your lining fabric on top of this, and you'll be able to cut both your lining and your front at the same time. All of these designs are symmetrical top to bottom and right to left, so it really doesn't matter whether you put your lining fabric face up or face down. If you want to make sure that it's going to go in the right direction, you could put this face down, because at the end of the day this will end up being on the back side of the hoop. So for this though, I'm just going to place this over the top of my other piece, and then I'm going to go and stitch color number 1, which is your die line. If you are doing the freestanding applique and you're going to do the little pillow or the little sachet, which is this version that's got a 2-piece back so that you can slide the sachet or the pillow inside. When you were doing this step, the biggest difference here is that you would have had 2 pieces of your back. And I just cut my 5-inch square in half, and then I clean finished the edges. I just used 1/4-inch seam seam and then folded that down and pressed it. So I have 2 clean finished edges. When you position your lining fabric on here before you have sewn your die line, you would just position these in your hoop so that they're lapping a little bit, like this. And then you would have done the same thing. You would have sewn your die line down, and then you would just cut that out all exactly the same. Okay, so we're back here to just the single lined one, or single piece lining. So you're going to now take this out of your hoop, and you're going to trim on that die line just as you did in the previous project. I've cut out my parts. So here's my lining and here's my front. I have gone on to step 7A2, and I have hooped up my stabilizer. I sprayed it first lightly with a little bit of temporary spray adhesive, and I stitched color number 1 on the stabilizer. So that will be your placement line. So I'm going to take my front, and I've left the original stabilizer in here. This is going to be a little wall hanging or a little sign. So just leaving that stabilizer in is going to make it a little more stable. And I'm just going to use that die line to place my part on the front. And in this instance, because I want, and I'm just pressing that into the temporary spray adhesive to hold it in place. And in this case, because I want the stabilizer to stay put in this, I'm going to put the back on the back side of the hoop. So I'm going to spray the back side of my lining with a little bit of temporary spray adhesive. I'm going to turn my hoop over, and if you want to add a little ribbon tab, this is where you do it. So I've got my ribbon here, and I'm just going to position this and I'm going to tape it into place. And anytime you're working on the back side of your hoop, you need to be really careful. Don't press real hard, because you could just dislodge your hoop. So we're just going to gently position the tape in here. And I'm taping at the top outside of the stitching area. And then this piece of tape is actually going to stay put when your project is finished. It's kind of hard to see the tape there, but there's tape right here, and there's tape here. And then I have my lining piece, which has been sprayed with temporary spray adhesive. And then I'm just going to position this on the back. And I'm using that placement line to position this. And again, just gently tap that into place. I'm going to trim my little thread tails here. Okay. Then turn this over, and now you can press down hard because this is level with your table. And then you're just going to finish stitching your design and tear away your stabilizer. And you'll end up with something like this. If you were doing the two-sided back, the way that I do this is I do everything on the top side of the stabilizer, because when you get all done, you'll just tear away all the stabilizer and you'll just have your fabric. So you would put your lining pieces, they would already be cut to shape, but they would go face down to the stabilizer, and then your other piece would go on top of that. So here's the last look at the project. So this is the applique on the towel. And then the freestanding, the little hanger, and the little sachet or pillow. Okay. Thanks. We'll see you next month.